Cool. So, hey guys, welcome to a new video. Today what I'm going to be talking about is, I don't know if you can see because I can't see what's going on there. What I'm going to be talking about is exercises to avoid with scoliosis, because I get a lot of questions around people saying, hey, what can I do? What can't I do? If I want to be a bodybuilder, if I want to basically gain muscle, lose weight, all these sort of things. First of all, we have to start off with the preface that you cannot really make black and white statements around you can do this exercise, can't do that exercise. There's some that are kind of good, there's some that are probably better for you, but you might not be able to bodybuild at all. You might not be able to lift weights at all. You might just do body weight stuff, and that might be the only thing you can do. You might not be able to walk. You need to consider your particular circumstance, because scoliosis and any sort of disability is a very vast topic. So it's like you have to consider what you can do, think about it logically. I would get professional help and get them to explain and get them to think, what can you do? And then do that. Do the thing that feels safe. So one thing that I really like to avoid is a lot of the traditional movements. So these traditional movements, they're put on a pedestal. So for instance, something like a squat. So with scoliosis, your torso is going to be shortened for the most part. If you're curved, it's going to be shortened. If you're fused, it's still going to be shortened because it didn't grow during that period. I'm talking about adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, so what probably 90% of you watching have, And basically the reason you don't want to squat with scoliosis is because, one, axial loading. We can load the muscles of the lower leg, we can load the muscles of the leg, the glutes, etc., without having to do any sort of spine loading. For instance, I love myself a leg press. I also do back extensions, but that's more for my back, my glutes, and my hamstrings, and then also I get a lot of quads on leg press. So you can basically get the whole spectrum. And I've spoken with some experts about this. I've spoken with Dr. Mike Israetel on this. We spoke about the difference between squatting and leg pressing in terms of hypertrophy, and the difference really wasn't that much. Have a listen.
For deadlifts, the sort of marginal benefit over the next best alternative, like stiff-legged deadlifts or high bar good mornings or bent over rows, depending on which muscle you want to hit, is very small. The marginal increase in fatigue, or basically the reduction of the stimulus to fatigue ratio, like how much more fatigue they give you versus how much more stimulus they give you, is absolutely not worth it for a huge number of people. And if you have injuries or sort of conditions such as scoliosis that can be contraindicated to deadlifting, then holy shit, it's not worth it, right? So, you could just be like, okay, I'm going for 1 to 2% better than I normally could have, like, but I'm putting myself at like really great risk of like really serious injury, like, like, what? How the fuck does that work?
Another movement that I particularly like to avoid is deadlifts. I think deadlifts are a fine movement for some people. For some people with scoliosis, they might be fine. Maybe a variation is okay. So maybe something like a Romanian deadlift, maybe that's fine. I think that's a fantastic movement, especially for bodybuilding. It's a fantastic movement. If you're not considering long-term health, it's a great movement, but we have to. And if you want to get anywhere in bodybuilding, you have to. Look at Jeff Alberts or Alberto Nunez, very, very good bodybuilders, fantastic physiques, and they're in their 40s projecting 10 more years of bodybuilding, of progressive bodybuilding. So it's like, okay, look at them, look at how they got there. They got there through good technique and movements that work. So the thing is, you have to be, one, good with your movement selection. So this is sort of the guideline. This is the guideline of how to find movements that work for you. So for instance, I find personally squats, deadlifts, normal pressing movements like a dumbbell press on a bench currently doesn't work for me. Maybe in the future, if other muscles, if I get imbalances in different areas, or if something changes, maybe these movements will become good. But right now, I can know they're not good for me. Now, how? How can I know that they're not good for me? So, let's take flat pressing for an example. When I'm assuming flat pressing, you can basically call it bench pressing or dumbbell pressing on a flat bench. It can be incline, whatever, doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference to me. The thing is, I find I can't control the momentum and I can't get a good connection with my pecs. So for one, I'm not getting a good connection. And you need a good connection and good mechanical tension to make any sort of progress, because that is the number one contributor to hypertrophy. I covered this in my podcast with Lyndon Purcell. Absolutely phenomenal podcast. Very knowledgeable guy. So if we're lacking mechanical tension through actually connecting through the pecs, through actually having any activation, then there's no point in doing the movement. So this is why I do a floor press. So for instance, for me, when I do a floor press, yes, you're limiting the range of motion slightly. However, you can change that. However, personally, I think going to 90 degrees or just slightly lower, or just going to the floor and then maybe going slightly lower if you elevate yourself a little bit, I personally see no issue with that. I do it just through a little pad. I have a little pad that sits under my back. It works phenomenally for me. It might work well for you. It might not. A lot of you will have a back hump. I have a back hump as well. Mine's quite prominent. It's very, very annoying. I get it. I know the exact same issue. If you angle the mat that you're lying on the correct way, you can sort of eliminate the back hump. But I find it almost helps to be on the side, because then you get more range of motion in the pec that is smaller. So it kind of works in a way, but it depends. You have to think the whole time it depends on your situation, and you have to look at your own situation. And then also you need to think, get over these movements. So for instance, I used to idolize David Lade because he's cool and he sumo deadlifts and all that jazz. And sumo deadlifts for him might work, but for me, they do not work. There's many reasons for that. I don't need a deadlift variation like that. My torso is short. I don't think I have good hip mobility. I have issues with my hips. So I would get hip issues, back issues. Just holding that amount of weight gives me pain in my upper body, in my ribs, in my intercostals. It's just like it's not necessary. So that's what you don't look for in a movement. Now, what do you look for? You want to look for a few things. 1, movements that work for you. So they must be safe. They must feel fantastic. This doesn't mean that they need to burn like a leg extension. They just need to be able to feel the target muscles. This isn't necessary. For instance, on a bench press, you don't need to feel the pecs activating, but you should see activation. And you should feel as though if you did it with a high enough repetitions, you would start to feel a burn. That's the main thing that I want you to look for. I also want you to be able to adhere to the movements. And the way that you do that is through 2 things. So 1, I want you to actually enjoy the movements. For instance, for me, I love leg press. I love it to death. It is my favorite movement to go and attack. I fucking love it. But if I got consistently injured on leg press, it doesn't matter. That takes it out of the running. So those 2 things. 1, you must enjoy the movement or be willing to do it properly even though you don't enjoy it. So do you have the self-discipline for that? That's one thing you need to take into account. And then also, look at, if you're, like, for instance, are you going to get injured if you did the movement for 6 weeks, 3 times a week? Would that injure you if you did a reasonable amount of volume, didn't do too much volume, so the volume isn't the issue, it's just the movement's not right for you? You need to look at that. And then also, and when I say movements, I mean anything like a squat, a deadlift, any sort of movement, a bicep curl, shoulder abduction, doesn't matter. Yeah. So here's some quick fire movements that I would generally avoid. So I would avoid a heavy barbell shoulder press that is very, very high incline. I would go for more a sort of, do some good, strong lateral raises. Look at Alberto Nunez's tutorials on lateral raises, absolutely phenomenal. And you can also do, instead of a very high incline shoulder press, possibly do something like a high incline dumbbell press. So we're talking, let's say, not 45 degrees, maybe slightly higher than 45, maybe 55 degrees, although it's very hard to sort of actually read it, but maybe something like 55 degrees. And you're just looking to make sure you're getting the deltoid in there. Yeah, I have good shoulder genetics. This isn't how I built my shoulders. My shoulders didn't come from doing heavy pressing. I just have good genetics in that department. And I've done some reasonable lateral raises in my life. Yeah, generally I would avoid squats and deadlifts. Bench press for me doesn't work that well. For you it might be amazing, but it all depends on the individual. So yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys want to hear more of what I talk about, go listen to my podcast. It's called The Student Side Hustle. It's on iTunes, Spotify, everywhere. If you have a podcast app, you can search it on there. It's free everywhere. I've had a lot of fantastic guests on when it comes to exercise science. Eric Helms, Mike Israetel, Greg Knuckles, Bryce Lewis, a lot of my friends from JPS, all of Team 3DMJ, except one. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and peace out.